Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just Move In's residential expert discussion for March 2023. Although it's so cold outside, it still feels like January to me. I'm here with former CEO of Propertymark, Mark Hayward. How are you doing, Mark?
Like you, just finding it a bit cold. I thought spring was coming, but it doesn't seem to materialise. We actually had snow yesterday morning, but it's gone. It's ridiculous. Anyway, let's not dwell on the weather.
No, we need more positive news, don't we? And so we need to talk about the budget.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's positive or not. We're impartial on these things, but the Chancellor's certainly giving off positive vibes, isn't he?
Very much so. And I met a guy yesterday and we were talking about it. He said it all looks very positive. And I said, yes, just remember these are politicians. They are politicians. That is what they want to do, and give that sort of impression. And it was that we're out of the woods, everything's going to be fine. But then you would say that if you're facing a general election in probably 14 months, they need this year to be good or not as bad, probably put as not as bad as last year, and just draw our memories away from the Truss government and the mini budget and the turmoil that ensued.
Never happened, Mark. It never happened. Well, I guess though that the headline news is relatively positive. It is positive that we're now not going to have a recession. Apparently, we may have a little bit of negative growth, is there such a thing, a little bit of contraction in the economy, but it's not going to amount to a recession because we're not going to have so many quarters in a row. And so growth for this year looks a lot better than we thought it might be 6 months ago.
And looking at the projected inflation rates, they're coming right down. Didn't really talk about interest rates yesterday, but looking at the money market, long-term rates are coming down. So obviously those wishing to lend in the future are taking a pragmatic view, saying, yes, I think they will come down. And once we see some headline decreases in the lending rate, that's going to be really positive.
I'm glad you mentioned interest rates, actually, because I kind of forgotten about those a little bit with everything in the budget. It wasn't really mentioned. But one thing that did catch my eye is that they still believe, there's a report in the Telegraph today, that they still think that it's more expensive to rent than to buy, despite the interest rises that we have seen over the last year or so.
I think there's only one area, isn't there, that it's actually more expensive to rent than it is to buy, and I think that's somewhere in the northeast, probably. But no, it's still, and they're still talking about rents increasing even further than they are at the moment and have been, because I don't think the supply issues have been altered in any way. There's still a dire lack of properties, and they are renting out at a very, very quick speed of knots.
Yes, rent rises are going up, aren't they, incredibly fast? And we'll talk about what the budget might mean for the property sector specifically in a while. But first of all, let's deal with the general picture. The people out there on the street, tenants, homeowners. What do you think they'll make of this budget?
I think it's pretty property neutral. I think if the budget does give a relatively feel-good factor, we know that the property market is based to a great extent on sentiment. So if people feel more confident, they're more likely to wish to buy or to sell. The rental issue is probably more difficult to solve because we know on the sales market it will ebb and flow, and there'll be more houses coming on, and there isn't an unlimited number of houses to buy, but they are there to be bought and to be sold. Whereas the rented sector, we have a very finite amount of properties there, and the indications are still that landlords are, in a lot of cases, looking to exit the market.
Yeah, and we'll get onto that in a little while, because I know that a lot of landlords were disappointed. I mean, it always takes, doesn't it, usually with budgets, a few days for the dust to settle and for everyone to digest the news. But that there's not a lot to digest here, is there, for the sector specifically? But I guess it's good news for landlords about with the new what they're saying about childcare, for example. I know that doesn't affect landlords directly, but it's going to help a lot of people. A 50% increase in funding for those on universal credit, that's going to help. And also 30 hours per week of free childcare for, I think before it was only children who are 3 and 4, but now it's from 9 months upwards. So I think that's going to help. And obviously if people are able to get out to work and they're not spending so much on childcare, then they should be able to afford their rent.
Absolutely, and then again, that's good. But again, we're not seeing a lot of people losing their properties because they can't pay the rent. That's not happening. But I think people do whatever. That's the last. It's like mortgage payments. It'll be the last thing that you cut, because it's all about roof over your head, whether you own it or whether you're renting it. So we're not seeing that at the moment, which is good.
Yeah, that's good. And also, I think that people were exhaling and they were relieved about the energy price guarantee being extended as well. I mean, what do we make of this? I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference. People are going to be paying the same until July, and then hopefully, unless we have the coldest winter on record, people won't have their heating on. And then with wholesale prices coming down, hopefully we're not going to have another winter like we've just had, with energy prices just being through the roof.
No, all the indications there are positive. I was going to say good, but probably they aren't good. They're just positive that they're not going to get any higher. And we've got that base, as you say, until the warmer months.
The warmer months of the year. Not that we have that many in our country, but certainly something, isn't it? And I thought it was interesting as well that the Chancellor specifically addressed the problem of people who are on prepay meters as well, which often work out a little bit more expensive, don't they, than people who are paying by direct debit.
Yeah, I mean, some of the costs are quite iniquitous on that. And of course, if you don't put the money or prepay, it immediately stops. Whereas if you're paying by direct debit or just a normal invoice that you get, there's certainly a time. So but there's been a lot of bad press about that. So I think it was just easier to knock it on the head and remove that sort of stigma.
Yeah, there's no need for the inequity, is there? People should be paying the same whether they're on a direct debit or a meter. But anyway, I mean that's perhaps enough about tenants and homeowners. I guess, as you mentioned earlier, that the big headline from this in the property sector is that there isn't really a headline. Nothing has happened. What's your reaction to that? Were you slightly disappointed, or were you just glad that they didn't make another catastrophic error?
I think I'm glad they didn't make a catastrophic error, but they didn't actually make any positive gestures or alterations to the property market at all. It would have been nice if we had something on stamp, or they could have announced a complete review on stamp duty, but they didn't do that. I think there's just very, very little there.
Yeah.
And as we know, normally what's going to be in the budget is sort of signposted well in advance. So we weren't getting our hopes up because something had been rumoured or they'd put something out. There was nothing. It was just property neutral.
But there had been some talk on the breeze, hadn't there, about possibly the government reinstating tax relief on mortgage interest payments, which was going to help landlords. There was some chat about that, but obviously nothing came of it.
Nothing came, and of course that would have been not just for landlords but for homeowners as well, which would have been a real help this time of high interest rates. But whether the chat came from government or just came from so-called experts or pundits, I'm not sure, but there was, again, nothing there.
Nothing there at all. I think some people as well were hoping for perhaps some incentives or some subsidies for landlords needing to improve their EPCs. as well, because we talked about that last month, didn't we? That this is almost going to like a ticking time bomb. But maybe the government's just thought we've got enough on our plate at the moment. Let's just leave it for 6 months and look at it then.
Absolutely, but there's been quite a lot of headlines about the cost, not just for residential property, but for commercial property, because of course the regulations come in earlier for commercial. So, but no, nothing there at all. And it would have been great to put something in there, because the cost of getting properties to be energy efficient is just rising. There's quite a lot of news now about heat pumps not being quite as efficient or quite the answer that we were all promised, apart from the cost and the inability to fit those large numbers. So
yeah, I guess the problem with heat pumps, because I looked into getting a heat pump, just very, very expensive to install. It's kind of how many landlords or even how many homeowners generally are going to have, you know, 10,000–15,000 pounds, you know, down the back of the sofa ready to invest in heat pumps at this particular moment in time.
Well, only those that can afford to put another £800,000 into their pension pot now.
That's not me, sadly.
No, nor I.
Yeah. No, I mean, the one other thing perhaps we should talk about from the budget is the corporation tax rise. This is obviously going to affect agencies that are, you know, have profits over £250,000, and it's quite a steep rise as well, isn't it, from 19 to 25%?
Yeah, if you think about it, it's a 25+% rise, which is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah,
I think corporation tax is something that people slightly forget as well. It's only when they start being very successful do they realise actually you're going to have to pay some, you know, meaty tax on that before you personally get taxed if you're a business owner. So it's a double whammy. But
yeah, it's going to have an effect on people who have a portfolio of properties. Landlords with a portfolio of properties, especially, you know, if they've registered themselves as a limited company.
And I think more and more landlords are doing that because it's obviously easier to not only acquire and dispose, but it's a far better tax system. But what it does do with properties registered in a company, it does allow HMRC to know where these landlords are and what they own.
Yeah.
At the moment, anecdotally, it would seem a lot of landlords are not declaring the rent that they receive from a property, because there's no way anybody's actually going to, until, you know, there is proper regulation, anybody can actually find out.
Yeah. So I guess what we've kind of revealed today, or what we've concluded, is that there really wasn't a lot in this budget about property. We talked about a few things there, but they're sort of things around the edges, aren't they? They're not really dealing with the core issues that we've discussed on this podcast for a number of months now. And it's kind of, it makes life harder for us, doesn't it, Mark? Because we need things to talk about, and instead we've got a bit of a tumbleweed with the name Hunt written on it, sort of tumbling across the screen without giving us anything big and juicy to talk about. But
there will be big and juicy things to talk about as we move forward. You know, we've talked about the sales market not being quite bad as people were expecting, but it's not necessarily as good as some people will tell you. Interest rate you talked about, and I know there has been talk about a further rate rise. I think the Governor of Bank of England sort of hinted that might be necessary. So there are, you know, a few bumps in the road ahead, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Although it was good news, wasn't it, that prices didn't go down in February. I think everyone was expecting them to dip, and they were actually stable and went up a little bit in February, didn't they? Which I think confused the experts a little bit.
Well, I think it does, because the February figures will probably relate to deals that were done towards the end. If it's on completion, it will relate to deals that were done sort of October onwards, where we were really in, you know, quite a bad way in terms of uncertainty. So no, I think that's good. It's the volume issue that we don't know what volume we're currently talking about. And if you look at new homes market, and house builders keep a very, very close on measure and pulse on reservations, and they are not only seeing that drop, but they're also reducing their build program. So we're going to see this year significantly less new homes being built than last year.
That was something actually that I was going to talk to you about in relation to the budget, is there was nothing in there, was there, about building new homes?
No, nothing, nothing at all. So, and they are having to cope with, obviously, new safety protocols. You've seen that on the cladding issue, that they've got a finite amount of time to put these right, which is going to stretch some of the medium to smaller ones, not necessarily the larger ones. So, yes, we just need to be mindful of what that will mean, because again, it just contracts the supply.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. And I mean, actually, this gives me an opportunity to segue into or segue towards Purple Bricks, who are having, well, they've certainly been in the news, haven't they, recently? What have you managed to glean from the headlines? What do you think's going on?
Well, I think, let's cast our mind back to when Purple Bricks started, which was around 2015. Agents were very dismissive about the way that they were running, or the business model, but it certainly took off, and their market share was substantially more than it currently is. There were a number of online agents at that time. That number has reduced because nobody's actually found a way of converting that into profit, significant profits. They hemorrhage cash because the only way to drive business to their door is through expensive television advertising. And I know historically when they've done that, apart from annoying agents, they have seen an increase in business. But the entrepreneurs that founded it are no longer there. They're now it's listed on AIM. They've had a very significant change in management. A number of chief executives have come and gone. Compliance has come and gone. They are not making the same money out of financial services as that they anticipated. So I think it's a bit of a perfect storm. But I mean, why after the pandemic, the 2 years subsequent to the pandemic, majority of agents had their best years, if not ever, but Purple Bricks didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the advertising campaigns there. I just wanted to quickly mention that I thought they were quite good, because it was a very, very simple idea. It wasn't an original idea, but I thought it was executed very, very well, and there must have been, quite high production values, things like that. So they must have chucked a lot of money at it. But I guess that superficially, at least, the idea of paying a low flat fee to sell your home is a very, very attractive one. But it's just, do people get the same service for that? Purple Bricks would say yes, but traditional agents would very much say no.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when Countrywide decided to dabble in the upfront fee and give homeowners a choice of, do you want to pay up front and you'll get X, Y, and Z, or do you want to wait on a no sale, no fee basis? The majority opted for the no sale, no fee basis because it's just yeah. And all right, it wasn't a huge amount of money, but you still had to find a 4-figure sum to put your house on the market.
And if it doesn't sell you with Purple Bricks, you just lose that for no benefit.
Absolutely. And you have to had to use their legal services, or there was a penalty to all that. So I think it's not a perfect storm, but it's a combination of a number of factors. And of course, we've had constraints on supply. Agents who get houses in the pandemic could sell them almost overnight, whereas Purple Bricks, if the number of listers that they employ has dropped, the results just aren't there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just sounds great in theory, doesn't it? But if you're a buyer, book your viewings online. Just click a button here, click a button there. Want to make an offer? Just type it in and send it across. But I guess the Purple Bricks model doesn't really give the agents an opportunity to do some of the things that they do best, like negotiation. They do viewings, of course, but I just kind of wonder what the impact of the online agents overall has been, charging people less. So this forces traditional agents to charge less to lower their commission rates. And does it lead to a general reduction in standards? Because obviously some things have to be cut in terms of service, don't they, if you're charging less?
Yeah, if you're charging less, you have to cut, as you say, standards. It means probably cutting people, which is not good. I think a certain generation of buyers would very much liked the ability to book a viewing online and put an offer in. But you'll see traditional agents who already put that sort of software in so that they can do that. But you still want, at some point, you need to talk to somebody, and you need some advice. Who's advising those sellers during a time where houses are not selling, that you really need to bring your price down and give them illustrations, whereas an online agent, probably because of the volume, isn't able to do that. And the local property agents were covering large areas of the country, so they really got their finger on the pulse of what's going on. Nor do they have a database of people looking to buy houses.
Yeah.
Where if you registered there, it's there and gone. If you register with an agent, he keeps your details, and he may well ring you up after 3 months to say, that house you saw, well, it's actually just come down in value. I think it's really, now's the time you really need to look at it. Or you need to look at that one because externally it doesn't look very exciting, but once you get in and see the size of the rooms or the garden, whatever, it's selling the positives rather than here it is. It's like a new car. You can go and kick the tires, you can look at it, it looks pretty clean, but that's all the help you're going to get.
Yeah, I guess this is why a hybrid approach arguably works better than just a pure tech automated online approach, doesn't it? Because you almost want the technology to be supporting the humans, not necessarily the other way around, or you want a nice balance.
Yeah, I think the technology would give humans more time to utilize soft skills, pick people up, hold people's hands, because we know that people only move once every 20, 25 years. So it's not something that you're an expert in. Yeah.
Well, I certainly hope that Purple Bricks can, if indeed they are up for sale, if they find a good buyer and continue, because there's obviously jobs on the line and things like this. So, we wish them well. And as independent observers, I guess we'll stand back and see what transpires.
I suspect we'll know more when we next speak.
Yes, potentially. Yes. Yeah. Well, the final thing I wanted to talk today about was did you see the headlines about the Supreme Court ruling about whether superior landlords are liable to pay rent repayment orders and to be in charge of whether they're responsible for the overall, meeting the legislation that applies to their particular properties. And this was the Reckerson versus Jepson court case, where initially a superior landlord was found to be liable, but then he appealed it, and then he won his appeal, didn't he? I think he won his appeal, and then it went to the Supreme Court to be the final adjudicator, and they've decided that the superior landlord is not responsible, and it is the intermediary, let's call them, in these rent-to-rent agreements.
Yes, because as you say, the agreement is with the intermediary. I don't think the intermediary would have the wherewithal to bring properties up to a certain standard if they fell below. We know that the majority of rent to rent is a company will agree to take a property to rent from a landlord, they obviously have to declare to the landlord, well, they should, what they're going to do, and then they split it up into small bedroom units and get a premium rent for that. But they've still got to get the necessary certificates, whether it's gas safety, all the other issues have got to be covered. Is there going to be a major investment required? If there is, I'm sure they're not going to want to, in effect, invest in a property that isn't theirs. I mean, they've only got it for a finite period. All right, slightly, it will be longer than the normal tenancy.
Yeah, it can be a few years, can't it?
And the appeal to the landlord is that, you know, my rent's going to be guaranteed by a company. They're taking a lot longer tenancy, so I've got some security there. But what you don't have is any control over what's going on in your property, and the damage that could have taken place, or indeed its inability to meet the necessary regulations. So I would say that I think tenants should become more wary of this. But as we've already said, there's still a huge lack of properties and accommodation to rent. So people may well be forced down a route that they really don't want to go down.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can see in this instance why the Supreme Court came to the decision that it did. I mean, if you're a landlord and you know, for example, and you're using an intermediary, or you know, your property may be being sublet, and you excuse me, and you don't know about it, you know, so if you don't know about it, how can you be liable?
Absolutely. Again, it doesn't encourage people to become landlords if that's what's going on, or that's what's being allowed to happen.
So does this mean that we've actually detected some good news for landlords, despite everything? I think we probably have, just about.
I think we have.
We have.
It may well be that they need to take back more control over their property. But we shall see. We shall see.
Well, perhaps we'll leave things there on a slightly positive note. So thanks again for your time, Mark. I guess in a month's time we'll be able to, the dust would have settled on the budget chat, and we'll know a little bit more about what's going on. Maybe there'll be more chat about mortgages and things like that, and we'll delve deep into it again in a month's time.
Look forward to it. Thank you, James.
And thanks very much to everyone for watching, and we'll see you in a month. Thanks. Bye.